Over the years, Formula One and international sports car racing have frequently been battling for supremacy. It's led to more than a few regulation changes over the years on both sides, and more often than not, those changes led to some truly fascinating creations. Take late 60s Formula 1 for example. Since 1961, Formula 1 engines had a very small displacement, no more than 1.5 litres. That's modern day family car size. But during that same time, sports car racing had come leaps and bounds. Just look at the 1966 24 Hours of Le Mans. The Ford GT40, Porsche 906 and Ferrari 275 were much more impressive and faster with V8, flat sixes and V12s. So in that same year, the regulations in Formula 1 changed. The maximum capacity was doubled from 1.5 litres to 3 litre. One of the teams involved in Formula 1 at the time was British Racing Motors, or BRM for short. With the new regulations, they obviously needed a new engine. They bored out their 1.5 litre V8 multiple times, but after a few years, the old V8 was done, so they needed something fresh. BRM had two options for the new engine. Option 1, work together with engine specialist Harry Westlake to develop a V12. Option 2, take the old V8 and use it to build something radically new. They would then use whichever engine would turn out to be the best. Unfortunately for BRM, Westlake then opted out of the agreement, leaving the team with only one option. That option would become one of the most maddeningly complicated engines Formula 1 had ever seen, the P75 H16 engine. To build this engine, BRM first turned their existing V8 into a flat 8. They then took another flat 8 and placed it on top of the old engine. The two flat 8s were then connected in the middle. As a result, BRM created an engine that, on its side, resembled the letter H. To make it work, each side of the engine needed its own radiator, its own fuel injection unit, its own distributor, and its own water pump. Another unusual thing about this engine was the fact that each of the 4 cylinder heads had its own exhaust. That meant 4 exhausts, 2 from the top of the engine and 2 from the bottom. But that meant that the engine had to be mounted much higher to make room for the bottom exhausts. To make matters worse, the crankshaft coupling the 2 flat 8s together was very prone to vibrations. The result of this madness was an engine with a lot of weight and a high center of gravity. But as much as it was heavy, it was also powerful, with 395 horsepower. Unsurprisingly, the engine and the chassis were not the best of friends, leading to a number of handling issues. Luckily, BRM had quite the pair of drivers: 1962 world champion Graham Hill and a fresh-faced talent by the name Jackie Stewart. The BRM P83, as it was known, debuted at the 1966 Monaco Grand Prix. Unfortunately, Stewart didn't really like it. He tried it for practice, but then switched back to the old 2.2 litre P261 and won the race in that car. He later said about the P83 that it was unnecessarily large, used more fuel, carried more oil and needed more water, all of which added weight and diminished the vehicle's agility. Luckily, Stewart wouldn't have to race a P83 for quite some time. It was plagued by reliability issues, and Stewart and Hill continued to use the P261 for most of the season as BRM worked on their new creation. The P83 arrived revamped for the last 3 races of the season. Also, BRM thought, because qualifying didn't go too well at Monza. Stewart was 9th and Hill was 11th. But just 5 laps into the race, both cars had retired with engine problems. The next race was in the US at Watkins Glen. Qualifying wise, the car improved, with Stewart on 5th place and Hill 6th. But while they both did more laps, neither made the finish, with Hill breaking down on lap 52 and Stewart following suit 1 lap later. Interestingly though, the H16 engine did win at Le Mans, but it wasn't in the BRM car. Lotus had bought the engine while they waited for the new engine to arrive and fitted it to their 43. Somehow, Jim Clark managed to keep the H16 engine going long enough to take the checkered flag. It would be the H16's only win, and it wasn't even in their own car. Interesting piece of trivia, by the way, the engine Lotus was waiting for at the time? The Ford Cosworth DFV, an engine that would change Formula 1 for decades to come. At the Mexican Grand Prix, trouble continued for BRM. the cars were leaking oil all weekend long. The team hoped they'd fix the engine when race day rolled around, but that proved untrue when Stewart's car was drained of oil and seized on lap 26. Hill had retired 8 laps earlier. His engine had misfired from the start. After the end of the season, world champion Hill had logically had enough of BRM's problem child and left for Lotus at the end of the season. Jackie Stewart agreed to stay and Mike Spence joined him as his new teammate. BRM decided to run the P81 for the 1967 season as well. This season went slightly better, with a podium spot for Stewart at the Belgian Grand Prix the highlight of the season, and really the car's whole existence. But the season also brought double retirements in South Africa, Britain and the United States. Belgium was the only race where both Spence and Stewart saw the checkered flag. After 1967, BRM finally laid the H16 to rest and developed a new engine. It was, simply said, a bad idea from the very start. Overly complicated and with little to no results, it probably shouldn't have even happened in the first place.